Hello everyone, today we're going to be looking at one of the oldest pieces of literature ever, the Odyssey!
Super Mario Odyssey!
No, not that. I meant Homer's Odyssey.
Is this about that minivan I rented once?
No! I mean the ancient Greek epic poem dictated by the blind storyteller, Homer. Many scholars suspect that the Odyssey was written around the time of 725 to 675 BC. It was intended to be presented orally, since that's how stories were shared back in the day. If you recall my Beowulf review, there usually was a designated storyteller who would tell stories and pass them on to others. Every generation of storytellers had to remember the story. However, that's not the best way to preserve a story, so it was written down. Now, if you've read any of the Percy Jackson books, some of the events in this story might look familiar to you. Anyways, the Odyssey details the events that happened after the Trojan War. Specifically, it talks about Odysseus' 10-year journey home. Now, so here's the thing. Odysseus had been fighting in the Trojan War for 10 years, and it took him 10 years to get home. So he's been away from home for 20 years! Why did it take him so long to get home? Because Poseidon is mad at him. Alright, now let's shift over to Ithaca, Odysseus' home. The story of the Odyssey begins in true epic fashion, in medias res. It starts with Odysseus' son, Telemachus, who is about 20-ish. Now, Telemachus is frustrated right now because a bunch of suitors are currently living in his house intending to marry his mom, Penelope. Now, Penelope doesn't want to marry any of them because she believes Odysseus will come home soon, even though it's been 20 years! With Athena's help, Telemachus decides to go out traveling to find any kind of news of his father, because he's real sick and tired of all these guys in his house hitting on his mom. Now, the suitors don't really like Telemachus either and plan to kill him. However, Telemachus is away at Sparta, where he meets up with Menelaus and Helen. Yes, the Helen of Troy. Menelaus tells Telemachus that he learned from the old sea god Proteus that Odysseus is currently on the island of Ogygia and is the captive of the nymph Calypso. And now we cut to Odysseus, who has been with Calypso for 7 years! Calypso is holding Odysseus here because she loves him, but he doesn't love her. Now, Calypso is offering the man everything he wants, including immortality, but Odysseus doesn't want immortality. He wants to go home to his wife and son. Hermes stops by and tells Calypso that she's been ordered to let Odysseus go home. Calypso finally lets Odysseus go home, but Big Bad Poseidon is still mad at him and wrecks Odysseus' raft. But he's saved by the nymph Ino. This allows him to swim to Sherry, which is the home of the Phaeacians. Phaeacians? I don't know how you say that, we're just gonna guess. Their princess Nausicaa finds Odysseus and takes him to her home, where her parents provide him hospitality. They intend to provide Odysseus with a ship so he can finally go home. No one knows who he is at this point. Now, while staying there, Odysseus is reminded of the time he unleashed the epic Trojan horse strategy. Since everyone now knows who he is, they ask Odysseus what the heck happened. Well, here's what happened to Odysseus on his way home. And I made this all one slide to save space and time, so here we go. Well, due to some storms driving them off course, Odysseus and his men come across the land of the Lotus Eaters. This place basically makes you forget about home and family, and you spend eternity having a good time. Odysseus had to drag his men back to the ships by force since they wanted to stay here. Then they land at the home of Polyphemus and the Cyclopses. I don't know how to say the plural of Cyclopses. We'll just say Cyclopses because it's easier on me, on my brain, I guess. Okay, now they don't see the one-eyed monsters yet, so they're out exploring and find Polyphemus' cave, but they get stuck in there since Polyphemus just walked right in while they were in there and closed the door. I don't know how much you guys know about Cyclopses, but they are usually depicted as giant. So the door that Polyphemus closed was not human-sized. It was very large and heavy. Polyphemus proceeds to eat Odysseus' men since dinner literally just walked into the door. Now, Odysseus has an epic tactic to get out, though. Okay? He gave Polyphemus some good wine that he had on him and said his name was Nobody. Then when Polyphemus was all nice and drunk, BAM! The old stake in the eye. Polyphemus literally told all of his neighbors that nobody attacked him. Now, I don't know if these Cyclopses were smart or stupid, but they didn't help him since he said that nobody attacked him. Odysseus and the rest of his men get onto Polyphemus' sheep and leave the cave when Polyphemus lets them out. While Odysseus and the crew escape, Polyphemus asks his dad, Poseidon, to curse him to wander 10 years. And that's probably another reason why Poseidon is mad at him. Well, they then come into the realm of the wind god, Aeolus, who provides a magical bag containing the west wind that will guide them home. But the stupid crew decides to see what's in the bag and releases the wind, and now they can't use it! When Odysseus goes back to ask Aeolus for more help, Aeolus wants nothing to do with him. They also find the Lystrygonian giants, which destroy all but Odysseus' ship. Then they come to the island of Circe, who turns Odysseus' men into pigs. Thankfully, Hermes is here to give Odysseus an herb that nulls Circe's magic. Odysseus forces Circe to turn his men back to normal, and she does. Then Odysseus heads back out and summons the dead. He meets all sorts of dead guys, like Theseus and Achilles, who had been dead for some time now. His real intention was to summon Tiresias, who told him that he'll get home quickly if he doesn't go to the island of the sun god Helios and slaughter his sun cattle. If that happens, his ship will be destroyed and all of his crew will die, leaving Odysseus alone. They head back out and make their way to the island of the Sirens. Now here's the thing about the Sirens. They lure you to your death by singing about the best possible things ever, and maybe take that shape too. Odysseus wanted to hear the song, so he tells all his men to plug their ears and tie him to the mast, and if he begs to be let loose, don't let him loose! Thankfully, the crew actually listens this time, unlike all the other times. Freaking crew. They pass by the giant whirlpool monster Charybdis and the six-headed monster Scylla. Then they land on the island of Thrinacia, where Helios keeps his cows. Now, Odysseus didn't want to go there, and he told them to go past it, but the crew was like, nah, we'll be fine. We'll just chill there for a few minutes and then go. But then a storm hits, preventing them from leaving. Now, this storm lasts for so long that all of their supplies are gone, and those cows over there are looking mighty tasty. You can see where this is going. The crew slaughter one of the cows while Odysseus is sleeping, and Helios is angry. Once Odysseus and crew finally leave, they get caught up in a massive storm. All of the crew drowns, and Odysseus gets shipwrecked on Ogygia. And that's what happened to Odysseus. Now, the Phaeacians still agree to take Odysseus home, and they do. However, Odysseus decides to come home in disguise and finds his swineherd Eumaeus, who doesn't know who he is, because he's in disguise. He stays with Eumaeus for a while, and Telemachus is on his way home when Athena tells him to go to Eumaeus' house for a bit. Odysseus tells Telemachus who he really is, and they plot a cunning plan to kill all the suitors in their house. Now, when they got home, nobody knows who Odysseus is. They think he's just some beggar that Telemachus wanted to take in because he's a nice guy. Odysseus actually speaks with Penelope for a bit and tests her to make sure she's remained faithful, and she has. Now, here's the thing about Penelope. As I said, she did not want to marry any of those suitors. When they started bothering her, she told them that she'd be working on a shroud for Laertes, Odysseus' father. So during the day, she'd weave, and during the night, she'd undo all of her work. She managed to keep this up for a long time until she was caught and forced to finish it. Now, Athena inspires Penelope to make a little contest for the suitors. Whoever can string Odysseus' bow and fire it through 12 axe heads will be the one she chooses to marry. Alright, I have to make this clear now. It is really hard to string a bow, especially back then. I'm sure for some of you out there who are experienced, it's not that bad, but for me, I don't think I could do it without any help. Anyways, all of the suitors are having a very difficult time stringing the bow. Then Odysseus over here just casually strings the bow and shoots it through the axe heads and then proceeds to murder all of the suitors. Penelope doesn't believe Odysseus at first when he reveals himself to her. She tests him by telling him to move their bed. Odysseus is a little frustrated at this since their bed is a freaking tree still rooted to the ground. He tells her as much, and that's when she believes him. Then they live happily ever after the end. Oh, and there was a bit where Odysseus goes to see his father, and the kin of the suitors try to kill Odysseus, but he wipes them out. Alright, analysis time. Now, here's the interesting thing about epics. They usually start with a prayer, either to a god or to a muse. This one was to a muse. It's basically a way of asking for help and telling the story in the most accurate way possible. Throughout the story, there were also quite a few omens, mostly in the form of birds. There are multiple instances where an eagle or a hawk is flying around, and then the people are like, hey, that means this will happen. There are a lot of them sprinkled throughout the story. Honestly, that'd be a fun paper to write about. Now, here's one thing that you could all write about. It's called Why Odysseus and Telemachus Were the Only Ones with Actual Brains Throughout This Entire Quest. It's just really frustrating that the crew and the suitors never listened to people who prophesied exactly what would happen to them if they did a certain thing. There are lots of moments like that, but if you think about it, there wouldn't really be a good story if everyone was smart about the decisions they made. I mean, let's be real. Plus, we get a nice shift from the Iliad, which didn't end so happily. As you'll see in the Iliad review, the story ends with Achilles extremely mad over the death of his best friend Patroclus. Achilles himself ends up being killed by Paris, the guy who started this whole dang war. While the Odyssey did have its fair share of frustration and bad times, it ended happily with Odysseus returning home to his wife and family. Overall, this epic still holds up today. There are a lot of stories based off the Odyssey, and I'm sure many people use it as a good base for hero's journey stories, which are really common nowadays. I'd recommend this for ages 14 and up, but that all depends on the translation. This is the age recommendation for the translation that I read, which was a bit more graphic. It still was a fun read, and I hope every single one of you gets a chance to read it as well. The Odyssey is taught frequently in school, so there's a high chance that you will have to read it, or have read it at some point in your life. I hope I was able to help you understand the story a lot better, and I hope you all enjoy it. Happy reading, everyone!